just remember that this is a time when we all have to be bold and share the simple gospel of Jesus Christ with people.
And now, Hal Lindsey presents the Bible Prophecy Series, The Coming of the Last World Superpower.
If you turn with me to John chapter 1, where it says, "No man has seen God at any time. The only begotten God, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him," or led him forth into clear view. Now the King James says, "The only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him." In the best manuscripts that the translators who did the King James Version originally did not have. These have been found since that time, and they're more ancient manuscripts. They all have theta sigma. You see, that was an abbreviation in the ancient time for God. And in the original manuscripts, and boy, they're a real joy to have to sit down and figure out. There's no separation between words. All of the letters are in capital. They're all capital letters. There are no sentences. There are no division of words. They're all just a line of capital letters. And you have to get by the context what's being said there, okay? So apparently some scribe that was transcribing some of the a new issue of the text kind of fell asleep there, and he put it's just like kind of a Y sigma instead of a theta sigma. It's very close together. And so that ditography, that mistake, got enshrined in later manuscripts. Where you say, well, how did we know what is supposed to be there? Well, you take the most ancient manuscripts that are from different places, written by different people in different places, and you compare them word for word. And where you've got the most ancient and reliable text all agreeing on a word, you know you've got the original. And the earlier manuscripts all have the only begotten God, not the only begotten Son. And that changes the meaning dramatically, because what it is saying is the only God who ever went through birth. That's what it means. The only God who stepped out of eternity into time and allowed himself to be born as a human being. That's what it's talking about. And nothing can teach us more strongly that Jesus is the second person of the Godhead who stepped out of eternity into time and became the man that we know as Jesus Christ. So he's both man and God in one person, indivisible, but without mixture of natures. He's absolutely God and he's true man, joined together in one person. Now we're shifting gears. Last week we talked about what? Alexander the Great, how he founded the Greek Empire. But the most important thing about what we were learning from history was this, that unlike any other conqueror of the past before Alexander, he was a great warrior. He was absolutely brilliant. But his uniqueness was in the fact that he had this passion not just to conquer people and nations, but to, once he conquered them, to show them mercy and to get them to adopt the Greek language and Greek culture. And so he literally, what they call Hellenized, he Hellenized, Hellas is the Greek word for Greek. He Greekized them. He turned them into Greek-speaking, Greek Greek-cultured people. And he spread that everywhere he went. And remember, he had to construct a language when he conquered the other tribes of Greece and brought them all together that had been fighting for centuries against each other. He had to construct a language himself that he called Koine Greek, which is common Greek, so that they could all understand each other. And that was the Greek that he spread from the borders of the boot of Italy all the way over to the Indus River in India. And that culture, he's so planted in all the places he conquered that it remained. And that was the language that the Greek New Testament was written in. So you can see how God used him to spread this beautiful language. It's the Koine Greek is probably the most precise language for communicating exact thought that ever existed. If you follow the laws of grammar and syntax in Greek, there will be one way to understand what's being written or said. And it was Alexander, in his genius, that constructed that kind of grammar and syntax. And so he spread that, and of course that was, by the time he died in, I think it was 325, I believe. I have my notes with me tonight. 325 BC, by the time he died, he had spread the Greek language to the extremes of the civilized world. Forgot again to bring that thing. All right, now, God used him to set up the language and the culture so that once the New Testament was written, the apostles and the disciples of Jesus could take the news of Jesus Christ quickly to the known world. Now, Daniel tells us, you remember now that Daniel predicted that the Babylon Empire would be the first great world superpower, first one to really control the known world. And it would be conquered by the Medo-Persian Empire. These are named in Daniel chapter 8. And the Medo-Persian Empire would be conquered by the Greek Empire through the genius of the first king. That was predicted. And then it tells us that the fourth empire, and there will only be 4 world conquering empires according to God. The fourth empire, phase 1, would take over what was left of the Greek Empire. It's interesting, I was studying this tonight, that when Alexander was establishing his empire, that the city of Rome, largely populated by a mysterious ancient people called the Etruscans. You ever heard of them? The Etruscans. We don't know a lot about them, but they were a genius culture. And so many of those people moved to a place called Rome, and they settled down there. When Alexander was conquering all of his worlds way over into this, off the map here, the Romans were a city-state. And when Alexander died, there was about 30,000 people living in Rome and developing a strong central culture. The environs around it had about another 90,000 people. So you had a total of about 120,000 that could be called Rome. Now, that wasn't much to think about. That was about 325 BC. But this culture began to grow and grow. And pretty soon, that culture, by By 280 BC, they had doubled in number. And they began to form a military that was going out and bringing forcefully more people under their control. And so this kept going on. And one of the things about the Romans, I have a book in my library I wouldn't loan to the archangels. Just kidding, you guys. It's called The Military Institutes of the Roman Legion. It's from the Military Classic series. As a matter of fact, most militaries encourage their officers to read it. I know the Germans really read it. But the Military Institutes of the Roman Legions really, it is a very, very interesting book because it shows how exhaustively and minutely the original Roman legions were trained. And as the city-state of Rome began to expand, they had a very energetic, very intelligent people. As they began to expand, they began to create a new concept of military, and they put their keenest minds and their keenest citizens into the army. Everybody had to serve. And they began to develop a military that was absolutely, even surpassed the kind of training that Alexander gave his Greek legions. And so they developed a form of fighting that was even more revolutionary than the phalanx that was used by Alexander. Did you know that it took 5 years to develop a legionnaire? That's how much training you had to have. And a Roman legionnaire was trained like you take here, and you mark off 2 meters square. A legionnaire was trained to be able to defend 2 square meters. The next legionnaire to him was trained to defend 2 square meters. In other words, each one knew everything it was needed to do to defend 2 square meters. And they depended on each other being able to defend the square meters next to them. And so they learned through extreme military training how to make every move with a sword to defend 2 square meters. And when a legion formed up, and of course they had other tactics that they used of these formations that they had, when the legions began to move, they were like a lawnmower. I mean, they had another very unusual thing. Whereas most of the people they fought would have these big axes and they'd have big long swords and everything else. A legionnaire had a shield and a sword that was 24 inch, had a blade of 24 inches called a machaira. Some of the people they were about to fight would look at that short sword and laugh. But a legionnaire knew how to use it. It was a sharp, 2-edged sword with a point, 24-inch blade. And so when a legionnaire would come up on an enemy force, they knew how to come in on the man. They knew how to trick him into making, they'd make a swing at him like that. And when he swung like that, the legionnaire knew exactly how to dodge and come up under while he's got his arm up like that and come up and to get him with a short sword. And they could mow them down. In fact, most legions never fought equally. They usually fought with the odds at least 10-1 against them. And they rarely, ever lost. That was a kind of army that this city-state called Rome began to develop. And just like what Daniel said, he said they would be unlike any of the superpowers before them. They would be like iron, and they would devastate everything before them. They also learned about other kinds of military machines, catapults that could throw burning oil and things like that. But the key to the success of the Roman state was always the individual legionnaire that was well-trained, confident, and knew exactly how to defend 2 square meters. You got it? That's why, and you see, this has very important bearing on the resurrection. Do you know that? Because when the story got concocted that Jesus' disciples had stolen Jesus out of the tomb while the legionnaires slept, you would never find a legionnaire asleep, because the centurion of the guard checked them frequently during the night, and he'd come with a torch. If he found them asleep, he'd just set their toga on fire. And then when they got through trying to put that out, he'd put a sword right down here over the top of his breastplate. So it gave you insomnia. And besides that, in the literature of the New Testament about the resurrection, it says that they established a watch, and the word means a maximum security watch, which would have been a quaternion. A quaternion was 16 Roman legionnaires. Now, they wouldn't assign more than 16 legionnaires. You know why? Because 16 legionnaires could stand an army off until reinforcements got there. They'd just form a square, each one defend his square meters, and boom, nobody would get. If the disciples had tried to come and steal that body, there would have been disciples dead all over that garden. There'd been no way for that to happen. So you see, it pays to study the institutes of the Roman legion. But that's not the point. The key is this. While Alexander was conquering the world, and then his 4 generals took over as predicted after him and divided it up, Lysimachus, Cassander, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. When they split up what was left of the Roman or of the Greek Empire, this city-state was just beginning to make noise. And yet Daniel, about 380 years before it happened, Daniel predicted that that little city-state would become the most crushing world superpower the world had ever known. And so it did. Turn with me to Daniel chapter 7. Chapter 7 puts the spotlight on the 4th empire, which is Rome. So he says in verse 17, these great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings, or 4 kingdoms literally, who will arise from the earth. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, for all ages to come. And Daniel says, then I desired to know the exact meaning of the 4th beast. That's interesting. He sees, all of these powers being predicted here. But in the 4th chapter, it was the 4th superpower that caught Daniel's curiosity. And so in chapter 7, he emphasizes information predicted about the rise of this 4th kingdom, which is Rome. So let's see what he says. Then I desired to know the exact meaning of the 4th beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron, its claws of bronze, and which devoured, crushed, and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And the meaning of the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, and before which 3 of them fell, namely, that horn which had eyes and a mouth uttering great boast, and which was larger in appearance than its associates. I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them, until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one. And the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. There is the symbolism in the prophecy. Now he begins to interpret that symbolism, the angel that was interpreting this to Daniel. So let's see what he says. In verse 23, thus he said, the 4th beast will be a 4th kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and it will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom, now never was a phrase more important than that word, out of. You see it? Underline it. Okay, it's the 4th kingdom. He's going to crush and smash and everything else. And then he says, now the beast is the 4th kingdom, but the 10 horns. Now he's going to explain what do the 10 horns stand for. So let's look at it carefully now. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom. In other words, the 10 horns have to be out of that 4th kingdom, right? So it means they must be 10 kingdoms that evolve out of that very same 4th kingdom. It's not a 5th kingdom because they're still part of the culture and people of the 4th. Now notice, it doesn't say that the 4th kingdom is destroyed, does it? It simply says that it's going to take a different form, 10 horns, meaning 10 kingdoms, that will emerge out of that mighty, crushing 4th kingdom. Now, when we look at this from the vantage point that we are in history, we can see that there was a great parenthesis between verse 23 and verse 24. Right? Because the 4th kingdom came, it became this great empire. For over 500 years it existed and ruled. It became this great empire, and then it just kind of imploded and disintegrated. It wasn't really conquered from without. It just decayed from within and went into a mystery form. But in the days just before the Ancient of Days comes to set up his kingdom, you see, that was in the first part that we read there. In other words, there's going to be a 5th kingdom that's going to be built over the ashes of these 10 kingdoms that are going to be defeated not by men, but by God himself. He is the stone cut without hands in Daniel chapter 2 that knocks down the image. It's Jesus Christ that's going to destroy this final form of the 4th kingdom. It's the 4th kingdom. I call it Rome phase 2. Rome phase 2 is going to rise again in the form of 10 nations, and it's during that time they're going to conquer the world to a larger extent than any of the superpowers before them. But it's during their time that Jesus himself is going to come to earth and destroy it, and he will set up the kingdom of God on earth that will never be destroyed. So you see the scope of Daniel's prophecies. Let's read on. Horns, verse 24. Out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones, and will subdue 3 kings. All right, now, here you've got, you see, this Roman Empire phase 2 has to arise at the time just before Jesus comes back, because they're going to establish a power that Jesus himself is going to destroy. So you see, there's a great parenthesis between verse 23 and verse 24. But when these 10 kings arise, they're not the real superpower yet until this little horn, actually it's an 11th horn, comes up in the midst of these 10 horns, and he displaces 3 of the 10 and takes over. It's when this little horn that's different from the others comes in, and apparently there are 3 of these nations that are not going to go along with him, so he's just going to take away their government. When he comes, he will displace these 3, and then he will mold this 4th phase of Rome, or I should say Rome phase 2, into a superpower that will control the whole world for a short while.